I never expected her to remember my name, let alone everything else. The night had that faint hum of the city slipping into quiet, the sort of late hour where only the neon of corner stores and the occasional passing car punctuate silence. I was sitting on the worn vinyl stool at Marcy's Deli, the one with the faint smell of fried onions and coffee that never quite cools fast enough. I nursed my cup of black coffee, stirred it absent-mindedly, watching the steam curl and vanish before it could reach me. She was there, of course. Somehow always there, though she had no reason to be. My friend's mom, Claire, mid-40s, elegant in a way that wasn't about style, more like effortless attention to herself. Her sweater hung a little loose at the shoulders, and she had that way of tucking a stray lock behind her ear that made the motion feel deliberate, even though I knew it probably wasn't. "Hey," she said, voice light, almost like a question, as if she wasn't sure I'd notice. "Late night coffee run." I swallowed, blinking. Yeah, finals. You know how it is." My voice sounded smaller than I wanted. She smiled. Not the polite, friendly kind, but the kind that pulls at the corners of your chest without saying why. She lifted her mug in a mock toast, and I caught the faint sparkle of a ring catching the light. Tiny, almost invisible, like a secret she wasn't trying to hide. Exactly. "You always take it black, right?" She said it casually, but my stomach did that weird flip that I still couldn't explain. "Yeah. How do you—" my words faltered. "Just remember," she said, flicking her eyes toward my hands resting on the counter. "You're predictable." I wanted to tell her it made me feel seen in a way that was unnerving. Instead, I chuckled softly, folding my napkin into something symmetrical without really thinking. The diner quieted around us. Plates scraped, a distant laugh, the clatter of a spoon in a cup. I realized I was scanning her face for micro-signals I could never name. The way she shifted her weight on her heels, the faint crease at her brow when she was thinking, the almost imperceptible pause before she spoke. Tiny rhythms that weren't meant for me, and yet here I was cataloging them. I thought about the texts I never sent, the half-written messages lingering on my phone like tiny confessions I didn't trust anyone with. She had no idea. I had no idea if this was wrong or if it even mattered, and somehow that made it more electric. "I didn't expect to see you tonight," she said, leaning slightly closer, but not enough to cross the unspoken line. The scent of her shampoo, faint and floral, drifted toward me. "Yeah, me neither." I tried to keep my voice even, but my fingers fidgeted with the corner of a napkin. There was a pause, just a moment where the world seemed to contract around our small, shared space. I wanted to say something clever, something that would make her laugh and look at me differently. I said nothing. She smiled, small and knowing, then glanced at her watch. "I should get going. Early meeting tomorrow," she said. I nodded, suddenly aware of how empty my apartment would feel when I went back. The lingering warmth of her presence, the unclaimed attention, pressed on my chest. Then her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, hesitation crossing her face before she read the message. Her eyes flicked up, caught mine, and she said softly, almost too quietly for me to hear, "Maybe come by tomorrow." Just for a minute. I nodded, unsure if I was imagining the invitation or if my heart was just too loud. She smiled again, tucked the edge of her sweater under her wrist, and walked out into the night, leaving me staring at the empty stool, coffee gone cold. I stayed there a moment longer, trying to convince myself I wasn't already waiting for tomorrow. I found myself outside her apartment the next evening, lingering by the doorway longer than I intended. Claire's buzzer buzzed softly as I pressed it, and she opened the door with that same faint smile, as if she had been expecting me all along. "Come in," she said, voice casual, but the air between us had already thickened. The apartment smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old books, a combination that made me feel like I was stepping into a memory I wasn't supposed to have. She led me to the small kitchen, where a kettle was already humming. She poured 2 mugs of tea, the steam curling into the space between us. I wrapped my hands around the warm ceramic and tried to act normal. "Tried. You ever miss something before you even had it?" she asked suddenly, as if the question had been dangling in the air for days. I blinked. What do you mean? She looked down at her mug, tracing the rim with her thumb. I mean, little chances. Things I didn't take, people I didn't talk to, regrets that don't even make sense. Her honesty hit me in a way I didn't expect. My chest tightened, my thoughts already wandering to places they shouldn't. I wanted to tell her that I understood, that I'd spent most of my nights imagining how life could have been different if I hadn't been so cautious. But I didn't. I just nodded. The kettle clicked, and she poured the tea, holding the mugs in both hands like a small offering. I noticed the faint line at the corner of her eyes, the small tremor in her fingers. Everything about her felt real, fragile, and achingly close. We drank in silence for a while. I thought about my own mother, my friends, how none of them ever paused like this, how no one ever waited for a simple cup of tea to mean something. My mind replayed the moment from the diner, her laugh, her eyes catching mine, the way she remembered small, insignificant details about me. I should have left. I should have turned around, walked back to my apartment, and ignored the pull I could already feel. But I stayed. I lingered in her apartment, feeling the quiet weight of her presence. She smiled faintly at something I didn't catch, and I realized how dangerous it was. The age gap, my friendship with her son, the fact that she was divorced, living a life I was only allowed to glimpse from the edges. Every part of me screamed that it was wrong, but every part of me also wanted to stay. Then she reached across the small table and brushed a loose strand of hair behind my ear. Her touch was light, almost accidental, but it lingered longer than it should have. I felt the subtle heat of it, the meaning beneath the casual gesture. I don't know why that moment stayed with me. I thought later, replaying it over and over. Maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me. And in that small, quiet kitchen, with tea cooling between our hands and the city muted outside, I realized that seeing her, really seeing her, was a dangerous kind of comfort. I hadn't meant to stay that long, but I did. Somehow, her apartment felt like a pocket of stillness I didn't know I needed. She hummed softly while straightening a stack of mail, and I watched her, unsure if I was meant to leave or just exist here, quietly. "You didn't answer my text earlier," she said without looking up. The words were casual, but the pause afterwards said everything. I got caught up," I muttered, twisting the ring of my keys between my fingers. My voice sounded too loud. She nodded, and then, almost casually, brushed her thumb across the edge of a photograph on the fridge. I followed the motion with my eyes. A younger version of her, smiling with someone I guessed was her ex. I felt a tug I couldn't name, half curiosity, half guilt. The room smelled of warm tea and old paper. I wanted to lean closer to ask her about that photo, about her life before me, but my chest tightened. I wasn't sure I had the right to. I have to get some work done tomorrow," she said, voice careful. But she lingered in front of me, waiting for something I couldn't identify. I wanted to say stay. Wanted to say, wait, I don't care about work. But the words lodged in my throat. Instead, I just shifted my weight, awkwardly scraping the floor with my shoe. There was a pause, the kind that makes seconds stretch too long. She flicked her gaze toward my hands, then away. I noticed her fingers flexing around the mug, the faint tremor in her wrist, the way her sweater hung a little loose at the shoulder. All of it screamed, "I want to, but I can't." Footsteps outside. A neighbor, maybe. She glanced toward the door and tensed, just slightly. It felt like a warning. And then, almost too soon, the moment was gone. We ended up sitting on the small couch, mugs half empty, neither speaking. I felt the tension pressing between us, thick and quiet. I wanted to reach out, to close the small gap, but a voice in my head reminded me that this was dangerous. That this was her son's friend, that she had a life, rules I wasn't allowed to break. She leaned back, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. I noticed the faint scent of her shampoo again, floral and clean. I wanted to close my eyes and memorize it. Maybe I should. I started, but my words faltered, falling into the silence. She didn't move. She didn't interrupt. She just looked at me, waiting, and that made my chest hurt more than anything else. I imagined what would happen if I leaned forward, if our faces were just inches apart. Her lips soft and warm, my heart thudding too fast. And then, the phone buzzed. My phone. I glanced down. A message from a friend, asking where I'd gone. Reality. A reminder. A pullback. She shifted slightly, probably noticing my hesitation. Her eyes lingered, soft, and then she looked away, almost like she was saving both of us from ourselves. We were close. Too close. And for a fleeting second, I thought maybe one of us would cross that line. But we didn't. Not yet. The park was nearly empty, the late afternoon sun slipping behind clouds, washing the benches and paths in muted gold. We walked slowly, side by side, neither of us speaking much. I kept my hands stuffed in my pockets, noticing the way her sweater pulled slightly at the elbows, the faint sway of her hair as she moved. "You always seem quiet when you're alone," she said, almost as if she had just remembered I was there. I shrugged, not trusting my voice. "I guess. I notice things more." She smiled faintly, not looking at me. "I noticed you noticing me," she said after a pause, almost too quiet to be real. I stopped mid-step, my stomach twisting. I didn't want her to say it, and yet I didn't want her to stop. The words hung between us like smoke, half-thoughts, dangerous and warm. We came to a bench near the pond. She sat first, letting her hands rest loosely on her lap. I sat beside her, careful not to brush her. Every instinct told me to close the gap, but another told me to stay still. I sometimes think about what it would be like," she said slowly, almost halting, "to do something completely reckless. Something just for me." My chest tightened. Her words weren't about me, not entirely, but they landed there anyway. I wanted to tell her that I would be that reckless thing, that I'd throw caution out the window for her. But the words stayed inside, heavy and impossible. She turned slightly toward me, eyes soft but troubled. "But I can't," she whispered. I can't risk you or anyone finding out." The weight in her voice made me want to lean closer, to press my hand against hers, to reassure her that I didn't care about rules or risks, only that she was there, right here. But I froze, caught between desire and fear, between guilt and longing. A breeze passed, stirring leaves along the path. She tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, small gestures magnified by the silence. I noticed the faint tremor in her fingers, the way her knees shifted slightly, as if the bench were suddenly too small for the tension between us. "I shouldn't," she began again, and then stopped. Just stopped. Her lips parted, like she wanted to say more, like she wanted to invite something forbidden, but didn't. I realized then that she was unraveling, letting something fragile slip through the cracks, and I was helpless to catch it without breaking it. My hands twitched, wanting to reach, wanting to steady, wanting to claim. But I stayed still, my heart thudding, my mind running through every consequence, every stolen glance, every quiet confession between us. She looked at me, really looked, and I could feel her hesitation, her fear, her longing, all tangled into something impossible. And then, after a pause long enough to feel like an eternity, she asked it, not in words exactly, but in the tilt of her head, the way her eyes searched mine. "Do you even know what you want?" I walked past her apartment 3 nights in a row and didn't ring the bell. The thought made my chest ache in ways I didn't have words for, but something in the air between us had shifted. Claire's warmth, her soft laughter, the brush of her hand. It was all there one evening, gone the next, like a dream I couldn't hold. I kept my distance, pretending busyness, pretending exams, pretending nothing had changed. But every step away from her doorway felt heavier than the one toward it. Then, one morning, a message appeared on my phone. Not from her, from her son, asking if I'd seen his mom lately, casually enough to hide the sharp edge underneath. I didn't reply. I couldn't. When I finally saw her again, she was polite but distant, offering only half smiles. Something unspoken hovered over us. Something I could feel in the way she straightened a cushion or rearranged a stack of magazines. Gestures meant to fill the space between us without actually crossing it. I wanted to ask, to probe, but I couldn't. Instead, I observed the soft tremor in her fingers when she reached for a coffee mug, the way her eyes darted to the window, then quickly back at me, as if she were measuring something she didn't want me to see. "I've been busy," she said, voice careful, measured. Yeah, I managed. My own voice sounded small, uncertain. I wanted to reach across the table, but the distance was now a wall. Later, I learned something I hadn't known. An old friend, a man who had been in her life long before me, had stopped by unexpectedly. He'd brought memories she hadn't wanted to revisit, reminders of a chapter she'd mostly closed. I never asked for details, and she never offered them. The knowledge was enough. Enough to make me stop showing up, enough to make the warm glow I'd chased now feel sharp and brittle. I imagined scenarios that never happened. Him noticing me, him questioning her answering or not answering. My chest tightened with guilt, with longing, with the sheer weight of not knowing. I found myself folding napkins at a diner, tracing the rim of my coffee cup with my thumb, letting thoughts of her drift like smoke through my mind. Part of me wanted to text, to apologize for everything I hadn't done and everything I had, but my fingers hovered over the screen, and then I put the phone down. Weeks passed. She didn't call. I didn't show. The apartment door stayed closed. The bench by the pond remained empty. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused, like life forgot to finish the sentence, like the pause button had been hit on something that mattered more than it should. The world continued without me, and yet every small gesture, the way a cup rattled on a counter, the faint perfume of lemon cleaner in the supermarket, the echo of a laugh I couldn't place, reminded me that she existed somewhere I wasn't allowed to touch. And I stayed paused because maybe, just maybe, she was too. I didn't know what made me ring her bell that evening. Maybe it was the ache of all the days I'd stayed away, the weight of unsent texts, or just the memory of her hand brushing mine on that bench by the pond. She opened the door almost immediately, as if she'd been waiting. The faint scent of her perfume hit me first, something soft, floral, like a memory I couldn't place. And then her eyes, wary but not cold. "Hi," I said, voice careful. "Hey," she answered. Her smile was small, contained, but it reached her eyes, and that was enough to make me step inside. The apartment was quiet, the hum of the heater, the faint ticking of the wall clock filling the space. She moved toward the kitchen, and I followed, awkward, aware of every inch between us. I shouldn't have pulled away," she said suddenly, voice low. She stirred a pot of tea, avoiding my gaze, tracing the rim of the mug with her thumb like she was counting something. I was scared, of everything, of what it could mean. I wanted to tell her I understood, that I'd been scared too, that the ache of not seeing her, not talking to her, had been worse than any risk. But the words stuck somewhere between my chest and my tongue. Instead, I sat at the small table, letting the silence do part of the work. I watched her hands flex and relax around the mug, the subtle tremor that spoke louder than anything she said. I kept thinking maybe it was easier to stay away. Safer. Her voice broke slightly, not enough to sound dramatic, just human. I reached out, almost without thinking, letting my fingers brush the edge of her hand. The gesture was small, tentative, but she didn't pull away. Her eyes flicked up, softening, and for the first time in weeks, the tension between us didn't feel unbearable. I don't want safe," I said finally. My voice was low, rough at the edges. "Not if it means missing this." She looked at me, hesitation written across every line of her face. And then she gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod, a quiet agreement that didn't erase the risk but acknowledged the choice. We sat like that for a while, hands close but not fully entwined, the world outside muted. I realized that the power wasn't in grand gestures or declarations. It was in staying, in letting someone see you without shielding every corner. "Okay," she said softly, letting her thumb brush mine. Her voice wasn't loud or urgent. It didn't need to be. "Okay," I echoed. And that was enough. A small acknowledgement, a human connection. The rest, what it could become, what we might lose, didn't matter in that moment. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't neat. But it was real. And for now, that had to be enough. Weeks had passed, and the apartment building felt more like home than ever before. I walked past the lobby and saw her sorting the mail, the small bell above the door jingling softly as she glanced up and smiled. Just a fraction of a smile, but enough to make my chest lift. We fell back into routines that felt familiar, but different. Coffee at 8:47 a.m. in the small diner down the street, where she always remembered my black coffee just right. Sitting on the same bench by the pond, letting the world drift past while we shared small moments. A laugh, a glance, a hand brushing against mine. Nothing dramatic, nothing sudden. I realized that the intensity we'd carried, those weeks of longing, silence, near cross lines, had softened into something quieter, steadier. Not because the risk had vanished, but because we'd learned to live with it, to let our gestures speak louder than our words. One morning, I found her in the kitchen, pouring tea the way she had the first night I came over. The steam rose in delicate spirals, and she didn't need to say anything. I leaned against the counter, feeling the hum of the apartment around us, the soft echo of our small, ordinary life. "You take milk or sugar?" she asked, eyes flicking toward me. "Black," I said automatically, and she smiled faintly, tilting her head as if to say, "Still you." We moved through the days carefully, not perfect, not scripted. A dropped book, a missed text, a joke about the rain, all of it stitched together into something that felt like us. And each day, the quiet weight of being seen, truly seen, lingered between us. Sometimes, I caught myself replaying that first night at the diner. The warmth of her presence, the way she remembered my order, the soft hesitation in her voice when she'd asked if I wanted to come by. That memory didn't ache anymore. It had settled into something soft, a cornerstone of what we'd built. The park bench, the black coffee, the 8:47 a.m. ritual. They weren't milestones or markers. They were small proofs of endurance, of patience, of care. Proof that the slow burn had been worth it, that the quiet friction of our emotions had shaped something real, something earned. One evening, as the light dipped across the sidewalk outside her apartment, I let my hand brush hers. She didn't pull away. We didn't need to speak. A nod, a shared glance, the faint curl of a smile. That was enough. I realized then that love didn't always announce itself. Sometimes it settled quietly in the spaces between routines, in gestures too small for anyone else to notice. Sometimes it was just being allowed to exist in each other's lives without grand declarations, without dramatic proof. And I thought, softly to myself, this is enough. This is enough. Because we had found our rhythm, our quiet, messy human rhythm. And somehow, that made everything else fall into place. If this were adapted into a YouTube video, the closing line could be, "Did this story stay with you?" What kind of quiet, real love stories do you want to hear next?